Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. So, roughly 15 years ago, I was going to the hospital a lot, not for me, but to visit my grandmother. She'd reached the end of her life, and my family knew this. And I made a particular effort to go as much as possible because I wanted to see her as much as possible, because I wanted to ask her questions as much as possible. This was the last opportunity that I had to learn something that I had not asked her in the past. So, what I thought could have been the last time I would see her, I went and I sat next to her bed, and she was asleep. And I waited for her to wake up to see if we can create some kind of conversation. And indeed, her eyes opened up, a little bit disoriented, looked at me, leaned forward a little bit, and said, "It goes so fast." And I thought, is this the last thing she's going to say to me? Because it's kind of cool. It goes so fast. But it wasn't. The next thing she said to me was, "Reach into my purse and get $20 and please order me a pizza. The food is awful." I took everything she said with a grain of salt because she had dementia. Though I wasn't sure which one I was going to pick as her last thing that she would say to me, because one's kind of funny, and the other one I think meant something. I wasn't sure what it meant. I wasn't sure why she would tell me that it goes so fast. She turned 93 in the hospital. 93. When someone passes away, and you say, "Oh, well, how old were they?" They were 93. Whoa, they lived a good life. When someone passes away at 45, you say that's too soon. Now, why is it, this is what's going through my head, at 93 years old, she's saying it goes so fast. It almost upset me. Almost like she was selfish or something. Why would you think it goes so fast? Needless to say, I let it go. I tried to have a bit more of a conversation with her, but she fell back to sleep. And then the next time I went to go see her, she didn't wake up, and she had passed away. I was at peace with it because when she was alive, she was very much alive for most of my life up until that point. I was 29 when she passed away. And I spent a lot of the time that I had with her asking her questions. See, I was in history in university, so I was genuinely curious about her life growing up. Not just about family history, but just generally about history. She was the oldest person I knew, the oldest book that I knew, so I would ask questions, of course, how did we come to Canada? Why did we come to Canada? Where did you grow up in Montreal? What was your father like? What did he do? But then more general pop culture type questions. I would show up at her house, and I discovered Frank Sinatra on my own esteem, and I brought a Frank Sinatra CD to her, and I put it on, and I was excited. I thought she was going to start exploding in nostalgia, but she didn't move. She didn't move at all. I thought, is she going deaf? She's getting older. That wasn't the case. I said, "Granny, Frank Sinatra, right? You're from the 40s. That's when you were, in your youthful prime, right? The books and the history says Sinatra was the man in the 40s, like Elvis was in the 50s and the Beatles were in the 60s. Zeppelin was in the 70s, maybe Bon Jovi, I don't know, in the 80s, the 90s. Anyways, I lost track after a while, but she said no. I wasn't into Frank Sinatra. I said, "What? And who were you into?" She says, "I was into Perry Como." I thought, what's the difference? She says, "Oh, there was a difference." I said, "What's the difference?" They were both crooners. They both looked the same relatively and dressed the same. She says, "Oh, I thought Frank Sinatra was fresh." I thought, what the heck does fresh mean? It didn't mean anything too good. She thought he was fresh, too fresh. Perry Como was the serious cat. That's who she liked. Now, it's a small detail. It didn't rewrite history for me, but it made me think. If she hadn't have told me that, and someone would have asked me after she passed away, "Who was your grandmother into in the 40s? If we're talking about music," I probably would have said, "Well, it probably would have been Frank Sinatra." And I would have been wrong if I had not asked that question. And that wasn't just one time. That happened many times, that she answered my questions with answers that were kind of off the beating path a little bit. Each one not too relevant, but if you take each one and you combine it, it does create a bigger narrative that helps me understand the past in a different way, through her eyes. Different than reading books about what the 40s were like or what the 50s were like. This was just as genuine because she was there. And because it was her experience and no one else's experience, I labeled that an endangered story. Because if I had not asked that story, I would not know it. And then it stays in her mind, and then once she dies, the story dies, it becomes as extinct as the dinosaurs. But my grandmother is not unique to this. That's for sure. But it does go so fast. That set the groundwork to a series that I'm doing called Endangered Stories. It made me very curious. Who else has these little tidbits? Who else is off the beating path? In my community where I grew up here in the suburbs of Montreal, the Great West Island. And in the West Island, I wanted to speak to our elders. Now it's the baby boomers, right? Or some that are a little older than them. They're called the lost generation. So we're talking late 60s, 70s, and a little bit into the 80s. If I can find someone in their 90s, unbelievable. It's like finding the gold at the end of the rainbow. So I sit with them and I ask them kind of general questions just to see where they're at. You know, I want to know about the West Island. I want to know about the history of the West Island, right? Because there really isn't a history of the West Island. It's fairly new. I mean suburban West Island. So the people say, oh, you know, when I moved in here, it was the 50s and the roads weren't paved and there were dirt roads and you know, we didn't have sewers for the rain runoff water and so there were ditches and there were little bridges over it. And I thought, okay, I'm kind of getting an idea of what the landscape looked like, you know, but nothing, I guess, too off the beating path. And I talked to someone else who was around that same age, a baby boomer, mid-70s, let's say, and they said the same thing. You know, we didn't have a high school at that time, and the roads were sort of, you know, dirt, and it was dirty, and there was that one store, and we used to get our groceries there. But what was interesting is that they both mentioned a place where they used to go get ice cream. They both mentioned this place. And I thought, is it a coincidence? Let me do a test. So I put this on the list of questions that I had. The next baby boomer I asked, sure enough, was there a place where you used to go get ice cream? And they said, was there a place where we used to go get ice cream? Now, they didn't respond like they said, oh, yeah, I remember that. But they lit up. Every person lit up. These were not memories. This was nostalgia. This was something different. I was tapping into something different. These baby boomers were remembering something that happened in their youth as if it happened only a year or two ago. This happens with you. This is nothing unique. This is nothing original to them. You could be 12 years old and remember something you did when you were 5 because it had such an impact on you. That's nostalgia. It's not a memory, right? So I said, okay, well, let me see if there's something about this place that I'm missing. Maybe I should have known about this place before I went in and asked questions. Feel a little dumb. So I did as a historian does. I got a bachelor's in history. I kind of knew how to do research. I went to the library. Of course, there's no books about the history of the West Island. So I checked the city minutes, as boring as that was, 1950s. There was a couple mentions about a place that wanted to open somewhere. I checked the old newspapers, the microfilm. That was cool. But still nothing. There was like an advertisement about a place, but nothing that matched the ice cream place that these people had in their minds, right? So what was going on here? This place was called the Milk Bar, and it existed for 10 years. It existed right when the baby boomers were coming of age. It opened in 51, and then it closed right before they kind of started to become teenagers. Closed in 61. And after it closed, the landscape quickly changed because baby boomers, as we all know, there was a lot of them. So there was a lot of quick development. So the land that place was on became an on-ramp from a highway. So guys like me, who grew up in the West Island, I'm 42, I've never seen that on-ramp not there. You'd have to be over 65 years old to know that this place would have even existed. So if these people had never told me that this place even existed, I would have never even thought about it, right? I would have never even known about it. It goes so fast. The details that I read on those newspapers and the books and the minutes and all that were very cold. And if I had read about those, I probably wouldn't have paid any second thought to it, really. This doesn't compare to someone who I interviewed who said, I never got along with my father. He was an angry man. My whole childhood, we never had a good moment. The only time we had a good moment was on Sundays. He would come downstairs and he would say, who wants to go out for ice cream? They would all get in their car and they would all go to the milk bar and have ice cream together. It affected her so much, she remembers what ice cream she had, what her dad had, what her mom had, and what her brother had. She remembers details about the store. She remembers details about when it opened, who she would see there, what the uniforms were like. She remembers everything. And she couldn't have been more than 8 years old. But that's the only time that she connected with her father. It goes so fast. There was another interview that I did where she said, if we were good all week, and let me remind you, these are 75-year-old and 80-year-old people telling me these things. If we were good all week in school, my parents promised us that we would go to the milk bar on Friday. So on Fridays we came home, we had dinner, we washed up, we took our baths, we got dressed in our pajamas. Mom and Dad put us in the car, and then we went out to get an ice cream at the milk bar. I mean, these are cute little nostalgic memories that I'm sure you guys have when you were kids. Again, nothing special. But you know what? Like my grandmother, if you take all of these little pieces and you put them together, it creates one very interesting narrative about the West Island. It gives it the romance and it gives it the gravitas that it deserves. Because if they had never told me this, then this place would have never existed. These were endangered stories, and these were at the risk of being extinct. Only because they had the nostalgia of this place. Only because I asked them. They hadn't thought about it in decades. So when I think back to my grandmother, and when she said, it goes so fast, I got to think, was it a warning? Was it advice? I think it was both. I think the warning was, don't take any of your memories or experiences for granted. And the advice is, take each one of those memories and find the nostalgia in them. Because the more nostalgia you build over time, the more things you're going to have to look back on when you reach that ripe old age of 93. And then maybe it'll seem like it didn't go so fast. Thank you.